to Nessa.
Mga gira taon niya dali.
Okay.
Ato sang tan-awon ko.
Center in Texas with my ate. A scientist ate. Ate Mila Taylor. Like Taylor Swift. Wow. Apollo 13. Wow.
Kalimutan ko sa akong Apple ID oy.
The International Space Station. Wow.
Kalimut ko sa akong password sa Apple ID.
I think this one is Moonlander. Moonlander?
Yeah.
Wow, nagkaroon ng maday ko.
Si katong sikat nga mga astronaut. Space to explore.
Historic landmark. Mission control. Apollo 11 milestone. Kisa ni si Ja. Aki sa bani? Thompson. Ay, ba to ang ticket?
So NASA did actually use the 747 transport and shuttle across the country from landing sites in California and New Mexico back to the launch site in Florida. One of the primary purposes of our shuttle program was to build the international...
Hello, nice to meet you. Pasko na Pasko. Nasa Saturn 5. Ay, Saturn 5. Naghada sila te.
So actually, roughly 1,600 acres that make up Johnson Space Center.
Lahat.
So back when NASA was first created in 1958,
Kami dari mo Pasko.
all missions were being conducted on a launch island, Virginia, and a hotel in Washington. However, as NASA grew, they often purchased plans.
Alligator. Sa third grade. Harmony, Columbus, Destiny.
Okay, it's right here.
Gusto ganun na sila.
Do not lean on glass or find your edge.
Mga party sila sa rocket.
Ang section ana.
Like I just said, don't lean on the glass. Or climb on the rail.
Nagkuhan na sa bus.
Manay na sabay sa akin. Sila ang mga astronauts. Nana ang nasa side.
As you walk down the
Lunch
hallway, just
date.
take a look down at the floor,
October.
at those blue and white stickers on the floor. They're going to help us keep some distance between groups today. So just try to stick to those stickers on the floor. Once again, sorry to sound like a broken record, but we do need to make sure our masks are covering our
Ano,
mouth
lang
and
outfit
nose.
na.
I know. Whoa, come over here. Can you see him?
Ana, anta yung attire.
Murag dili normal na.
Bigger than you.
Pagbuon jud kay namo ti. Uli nimo.
Imagine na.
I wonder what that girl
Uy. It's an honor kid ka adyo. Kana sila mga country na tinga parts sa NASA.
Mga country nga na-occupy sa space station. So, money ang Earth mo. Makina ni Earth. Somewhere here na ay space station. So, kanang space station mo, siya ay space nga in between gravity. Di siya magkabalik diretso kay ang force niya equal sa force sa spinning. So, muna na siya docking station. So, tanang countries adto dito sa space station. Ano mga countries na sa space station? Kabalo ka nga nung imagine mo nga nung na-apply ka naka-chat sa Pilipinas tungod sa space station. So, ang signal gikan sa
You're
US.
also welcome to the astronaut training facility.
Ito sa space station.
Oh, yeah, so mo ngadto sa space station rebound sa
Astronauts have always been
country.
here to train for their mission in
Dili
space.
gikan sa kuno mo dito.
Currently,
So
NASA
na ay
astronauts and
transmission
engineers
na
are
gitawag og
questioning an updated hardware for
transmission
our current space station
of
mission.
reception.
Well,
So na gitawag transmission.
until SpaceX began taking our astronauts up to the
Grabe,
space
no?
station earlier this year.
Picture ka ani on dito pa siya. Oh, I love her clothes.
Look at that big
Ang may guro banhaw ng ga-develop ng Argos.
Wow.
Active responsibility of
Ito na sa mga helmet ba natin, di ba?
Argos. Ano na?
Alam mo.
Mag-analyze sa brain activity.
Wow.
Look at the picture, Pascal.
Jara. Grabe naman naka-bright food mo.
It's got on YouTube, NASA Valkyrie. Valkyrie, I think we call it. Valkyrie.
Space.
Hinay mo
Map up facility.
Hinay mo balan. I know what Argos mean. Active response gravity offload system.
Offload system. Activity.
Active
Active.
response
Gravity.
offload system. Pangutan Asia.
And it's roughly the size of an American football field. The International Space Station is a partnership of 5 different space agencies,
Ilang mga
totaling 15
forma.
nations.
Na naman sila space station.
Together, the
Wala sila
United
matong.
States, Russia,
Jara.
China, Europe, and Japan have been working together for
Kaya
over 20 years
okay sila
to create the
mag-extract.
largest
Maglupad-lupad ang magpatulutaw.
This map of the ISS
Luod
provides
siya.
Yan ang sila mato. Masud sila. Murag, masud sila ka lang.
Sleeping bag.
Sleeping bag. I-trap.
I-drops.
If you need help visualizing what it looks like all together, you can look to our right
Uya
or
po
right
nila dahil po.
screen, and you'll see that model of the ISS hanging from the ceiling there in front of that black sheet on the wall. So that's what it looks like up in Earth orbit right
Actually,
now.
kasi dyan.
Di na makita ang naon.
Also
Gamas
in front of the
man.
window, maybe down to your
No,
right a
mura
little,
gadget si Jan.
right in front of you, if you're further towards the
Active.
back.
Sini-apply na na dyan.
You'll see
Yan
a
pa,
small
intern na.
greenish gray
Ah.
ring.
Intern na.
It looks like
Interview
Na,
na.
gadget si Jan.
that black
Wa, intern siya kasi siya kari.
ring on top.
Nag-hang out lang sa mga
So this is the Russian Soyuz
Wow.
capsule.
Kuyaw na kag mga estudyante.
The Soyuz
Oo,
has been
daghan.
O dari rata. Para. Dari rata. Pwede naman tamo daw dato dyan. Welcome to Saturn V or Saturn 5. Here we come.
Mas dali kang guting ng B kaysa 5.
Dito.
The little J2 here was used to test the launch escape system. So at the very top, you'll notice that launch escape system sitting up there. So that was used if there was ever an emergency on the rocket that required the astronauts to get away to safety. So if anything went wrong with this rocket, that launch escape system would fire and separate that capsule with the astronauts inside and take them away to safety. Thankfully, it was never actually had to be used on any manned missions because nothing ever went severely wrong with the rocket. But inside, you'll see one just like it on the Saturn V. Again, that's the Mercury Redstone rocket. And back at Space Center Houston in Starship Gallery, we actually have a real Mercury capsule on display. So definitely go through there and see that. It's the Phase 7, which was flown by Gordon Cooper. And so his flight lasted for 34 hours in that small little capsule up there. So it's pretty amazing how small that space is. And the astronauts actually described it as putting the capsule on rather than getting inside of it. So
Wow.
now you can follow me inside. We'll
Okay.
get started in there. Stage. However, there's one pretty big difference. So this engine here had to have the ability to stop and restart, unlike those engines down there, because it had two different purposes.
2,
So
3.
for its first burn, it burned fuel for about a minute to a minute and a half, and that would push them up into Earth orbit, and then it would shut down. Then once the astronauts were up in a parking orbit around the Earth, they had about 3 hours to check out all the systems and make sure it was safe enough to proceed with translunar injection, or TLI. So translunar injection is a more technical way of saying the astronauts would fire up this engine again and then put themselves on the trajectory or the pathway to get to the moon. And they'd reach a translunar coast speed of 25,000 miles an hour. So up here, you'll see in this part of the rocket, it looks a bit empty. So as you
Imagine
walk
ang
down
sakto
here,
na
look at this empty
65,
space.
paspas na gano'n.
Hani ka ng
That's where
1,000.
the lunar module would be
Wa
stored
na, manglupad na to ang
for launch.
kagda natin.
The lunar module
Day, anda ko. Day, mako. Jaga. Mo nang alingog-ngog tino. Imig mag-lunch. Ingani kadako. Jaga.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, so this is the legendary Saturn V rocket. So this rocket is not a model, it's not a mock-up. It's a real flight-ready Saturn V. So the Saturn V is the type of rocket that actually took astronauts 250,000 miles away, all the way to the moon. So this rocket you see here is made up of parts that would have been used on the Apollo 18, 19, and 20 missions had it not been canceled before they could fly. They had already built all of this hardware before they found out the program was canceled. So they put it on display here for the public to enjoy.
Okay.
So this first stage here would have been used on Apollo 19. The second would have been used on Apollo 20. And then the rest of the rocket, the third stage on up, would have been used on Apollo 18. So as we walk down the length of this rocket, you'll see that it's split up into different stages. So on the launch pad, all of these would actually be connected and standing upright. They would stand 363 feet tall, which is 60 feet taller than the Statue of Liberty in New York City. Fully fueled, it weighed 6.5 million pounds on the launch pad. And like I said on the tram, each of these F1 engines down here put out 1.5 million pounds of thrust for a total of about 7.5 million pounds, which is quite a lot. So the fuel in this first stage was actually liquid oxygen and liquid kerosene. There was enough fuel for it to burn for 2 minutes and 47 seconds. So barely 3 minutes after ignition, all of the fuel in this stage was spent. These engines down here burned about 30,000 pounds of fuel per second.
Oh my God.
So that's the equivalent of a real small swimming pool being used up every second. So after the fuel in this stage was spent, explosive bolts would detonate and separate this first stage from the rest of the rocket.
So
So
divided
down
siya
here,
into 3 parts.
you'll see that
At
these would
certain
have been
heights sa
connected
Earth,
by a
mag-drop
piece called
ang
the
isa
inner
ka
stage.
capsule.
So let's
May
look down
continue
a
to
little bit
in
further
abot
and
na
I'll
middle
explain
na
that.
sa atmosphere, mag-drop na kada. So first
Now,
drop
when we
can
passed mission control
so there
on
are
the way over here,
three
I
capsules.
said that 7 seconds after
Ano, kanay pangkira na siya sa
mission
gasolina.
control here
Jara.
at Houston would take over
Gasolina ang sa
launch
ano.
control down at Kennedy Space Center in Florida. So they always launched from Florida because they needed to get into an equatorial orbit around the equator. So Florida is the closest launch site in the continental U.S. to the equator. And also, this first stage, after it separated, it actually fell down into the Atlantic Ocean. And so when they launched, they needed to be able to roll over the Atlantic.
Bantu kay
So
bawo
when this
dadto.
separated, it landed in the ocean instead of on the land where it
Ande
was
ara
settled.
stage.
Stage 1, stage 2.
Wow.
Stage 3, kamay, nagkakamay.
Mao na timulahos no. Ang stage 3.
Magkalunod ka diri na.
Oo.
Sa ato mag-sin libro.
Oh, magkasindari aktualan na ka.
Actually still down in the
Naara.
Atlantic. NASA did go and pick them up. They just left them out there. So if you go online, you can actually search for a map of approximately where they all are today.
Kinig ang bata.
So right here, there would be the interstage covering up these 5 J2 engines and connecting these two pieces here. We don't have it on display so you can see these engines, but you can just imagine a big metal ring connecting the two. So the primary purpose of that interstage is to protect these engines as the first stage separated. Obviously, it would be really bad if this first stage were to strike
Arang mahal na
and
nito ba?
possibly damage the engine.
Mahal
But about 30 seconds after, this
mag-launch.
stage separated, the interstage would also fall away. Then the second stage would begin.
Kanang pag
And these engines
himo
here
pa
would
daning
throw out
rocket ba?
230,000 pounds of thrust
Adi
each.
rin just kang gasto agad jud no.
This stage, the second stage, uses liquid oxygen and liquid hydrogen as fuel.
Ayun
Explorer 1.
May magnetic field sa Earth. Iba na may North at South Pole.
Oh.
May North Pole and then South Pole.
America first satellite. Mo the first scientific discovery from space. Jaran no. Ana sa napakuan. Copyright.
Nga na makita ni mong magabi.
Dato
Kung
ta.
sa space. Mga stars na siya.
Millions no. Basta.
Around the planet.
Jara.
Kana nang mo na itong makitaan pero mas daghan pa na.
Kana di na may imagine ang una ako dato. Di man ay ilang gisakyan ti di ba? Nasa top. Nang ilang forma.
Take a photo later in the first.
Darag pa. Ang masasod ba?
Nga na ko gamay, nga na kapiot.
Ay, jara.
Manag kinaunhang dahil kinadaan ng spacecraft.
Kinadaan na first.
Actually, manag itaw ng command module
Si Evolution. Wow. Minit. Naman di takaginhawa. Gemini.
1965. Gemini na si Cooper, si Conrad. Sikat na siya mo na gitawag Conrad Foundation karon. Si Cooper
Was the third manned flight of the Gemini program above is the flown spacecraft which assurance
So, ang mga flight daghan na ay Gemini, na Explorer, na Columbia, Saturn. So, naka space out na siya every year. I mean, every several years. Kintay Saturn, ang Saturn na mga mission. Saturn 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Gemini 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Explorer to represent like year of advance.
Kana pong Apollo, di ba?
Ang Apollo also. Matong Apollo tong sa mga
Sa mono to si Ina, di arate nilupad ti. Nagawas. Ti aw ba na no? Nga na imong formal. Ya, daag earth imong gitan-aw.
actually, nainga na kung magawa sila ng
Hala
magawa
no.
sila sa capsule.
Jara. Kinahanglan dyan na ba?
Sa Florida.
Oo, ay.
Ang higit ng mga tao. Kaya naaman kita rin.
Nadari ang tanan. Maday ningos damon nga. Mas kuan dyan dito sa Texas. Mas nindot. Hala, jara. Wow.
Mana yung Apollo 17.
Ako, kaman mo siya. Tanaway lang forma. Kaloy, basad no? Sa suot. At magigita. Di na makuha ni tiba. Kaning nga na. Basta gagamay lang sa part sa kuan. Grabe.
Kinahanglan ko astronaut ka kay bagay ka every single detail dali sa mga parts.
Ay, lain pa na yung studyhan.
Latchas, mga buttons.
Lahi pa imuhang prepare ni glupad. Grabe, no? Fully. Wow. Wow, Jud. Kaadyo. Maglisang-lisang.
Actually, di man sila madisang kan ga-practice man sila dali.
Daking hatch.
May gitawag sa mga buoyancy. Manay sarado, manay door nila.
Daking tanong lang
Ilang
yung mucho.
ejection.
Wow.
Ang usa hawi dito, ang usa bira.
Bitaw, no? Kama o gajukat, diba? Mura da dyan mura ka ng...
Bituglo sa mga higher level nga physics.
Wow. Kami ba ako imong estudyante, te? Balik ko eskwela, be?
Mga estudyante ko, mga Amerikano, ilang maestra kay Pilipino.
Di ka makuha na na.
Naroon ako na 11.
Wow.
1969. Huwag pa kumataw. Gadig-dig pa siguro sa mamig daddy ani. Actually, 1969. Natawa na sila sa BP
Mr.
ana.
Rights. Nanay sila da. Amo ano ni te kani ilang sunina ni. Hala te sabi mo picture ko be.
Karag
Wala ang lover pagkatapos lagi, di ba? Grabe ka. Ang tawag ana, di murag. Or tinuod ba? Giyon sa kanila paghimo, no?
ilang mini.
Kamera ni.
Wow. Manay camera dito.
May kinakip, no? Kanang ingani na. Bye-bye, Longhorn. Kadagkoon sa inyong horn, gyud long, gyud mo, no? Wow. Tanawa. Wow.
Now this white piece extending from the round capsule towards the wall down there, that's the launch escape system that we discussed outside. So if there was an emergency with the rocket, it would have been a successful way taken them to safety.
Wow.
However, it was never actually used. So about 30 seconds after that second stage down there started firing, it would separate, and so by the time they're up in Earth orbit, this white piece is gone, and the brown command module is the thing that's up at the very top. So if you look here on the diagram, you'll see in letter A, or A there, that's the process where this piece opens up, and the command and service module turns, pulls it out, and they head to the moon like you see in letter B. Once they get to the moon, you'll see in letter C, they separate, and the lunar module goes down to the surface. So on the Apollo program, there were always 3 astronauts that went to the moon. 2 of them would actually get in that lunar module and go down to the surface, while the other one, the third one, would stay in the command module up here, orbiting the moon, waiting for the other 2 to finish their work down on the surface of the moon. And then once they were done and ready to head back, you see in letter D there, top part of that lunar module would launch off the moon. They'd dock with the command and service module up in lunar orbit, and then they'd get inside of it, they'd separate that lunar module piece and then head back to Earth, only in this command and service module. So this entire rocket that you see here today is almost all fuel. The only thing that they're coming back in is this command and service module. When they get close enough to Earth, the service module will also separate, and the ground command module here is the only thing to come back safely and intact into Earth's atmosphere with the astronauts inside. So as they get closer to the surface, 3 parachutes will deploy and slow them down enough for a splashdown in the Pacific Ocean, and then a U.S. Navy carrier will come out, pick them up, and take them back to land. So think about everything we've discussed today. So back in 1961, NASA was launching about 15-minute missions on top of Redstone rockets like we saw outside on the Mercury program. And less than a decade later, they roll out the Saturn V and take astronauts all the way to the moon. So So a pretty impressive feat of engineering and brilliance in less than a decade. So now you may be wondering, what's NASA still doing today? Well, they're still doing science and research on board the ISS that is currently up in Earth orbit, and they're preparing
International
for
space.
longer journeys onto the moon and back and then to Mars. So like we saw in Building 9 back there at the astronaut training facility, they want to build Lunar Gateway, which is going to be a space station that orbits the moon. It was that silver capsule we saw with Northrop Grumman on the side. And then by 2024, they also want to put 2 astronauts back down onto the surface of the moon. And hopefully by the 2040s or so, we'll have astronauts going all the way to Mars. So with that being said, that concludes our tour for the day. Thank you very much for your time and attention. I'll be over here if you have any questions. If you don't, just go ahead and head back to the trail outside the door on the opposite side of the rocket here. Thanks again.
Thank you. Samples. Astronauts brought lunar samples to Earth. Wow.
Maganda sila mga sampong gikan sa moon.
Wow. Kadto dito kilid.
Mao na bago-bago nga command module Orion. Nako na siya.
Katong guys sa katong isa no nga gamay kaadyo.
Karon dako na siya.
Ni change na nga. Ani reklamo na piot oy. Lagi sa gamay. Communication din.
Understanding those phenomena allow us to look at how we can improve treatment of disease here on Earth.
What we have is the capability to affect people's quality of life.
It's not just drug companies that can benefit from experiments or research in space.
Manila
It's
mapil ng gravity, so okay ra.
across the
Trap.
Oh, ito po iba po. Baliktad.
Wala mga sapatos ipangkakot.
Hala no. Kay maglupas. Kanang malibang ti kana hani man ni.
Ano, libang, saksya.
Saksya.
When we
So,
were
malibang
doing the
sila,
reauthorization of
lingkod
NASA,
sila diha,
we
anya,
wanted to
isa.
expand the opportunities to
Nya, malibang sila
various
kinahanglan,
experimentation
gahukot dud sila aron di sila maglibang.
Mo na tay klarong.
Congress declared the U.S. portion of the International Space Station a national laboratory.
Nice
Essentially,
day,
it opened up opportunities for research that could be done on the space station that would benefit us here on Earth.
Everyday companies and everyday researchers and everyday people
Tanaway lang
think
daan
about
nga
using the space
computer.
station. That's
Kada
Dayo-dayo.
Today,
Wow.
we offer opportunities to the
Yan na sila
researchers that never
magkaon.
existed before.
Ang ilang mga utensils ibutang sa magnet aron dili
Access to
maglupad.
experts who create
Adoy.
hardware.
Ilang mga mga scissors, mga
Tanan-tanan.
na ay magnet.
Grabe no.
people here on Earth to do space-based research.
Hani man puning na yung mga sodan na ibabaw kabinet
To
kabinet.
help guide these non-traditional innovative users from their traditional labs here on the ground to
Wow.
very unusual and important asset in space.
Mission Mars. Alam mo ni mapa sa Mars. Kesa po'y nagpangan, danit eh. Mga lugar.
Kuan, nasa.
Nasa na po, no?
Panganlan na nila depende sa property sa mga rocks.
Na, day po sila yung mga canyon plate,
Canyon.
Volcano.
Na, ang Mars lagi mura po siya. Or
Earth, crater, wala no?
possible site for formation. Someday mo adto ra. Siguro ko puli atong mga anak adto nag Mars.
Nga kanang mapuy-an ba gyud ato te? Na bay life gyud ato?
Na ay life.
Naa.
Mo na yan nag-undergo sila mga testing karon.
Wala do.
So na-prove na nila nga na ay water.
Ay water gyud.
Pero dili niya na kadaghan compared sa ano.
Earth.
Mhm. na karon sa Mars.
Jara.
Low temperature
Kay bawa
nila,
pa dyan sila.
Negative 89.
Hmm.
Ang high temperature 36.
Hi.
Right.
Di na makadyo init po no.
32 man ang freezing no. So gamay-gamay na.
Wala, oy, magdari na lang ko sa ti. Na kung atong Mars ti, oy.
So ana kay magtuwa ko ana.
Oh,
Ma-feel nimo kung unsay feel sa gravity sa Mars ug Earth.
wow.
Pero dito mahandol ana kay COVID.
Lagi. Wow.
So ang Mars has 0.38 the gravity of Earth. So gamay ra kayo ang gravity sa Mars.
Oh.
Even less than half. So if you weigh 100 pounds on Earth, you would only weigh 38 pounds in Mars. Alright, that on Jay dito aron ingnog niwang. Kaan.
Magamay rin kaya mo
Similar
ito.
lagi tayo ang Mars and Earth. Mas bugnaw lang gid tayo ang Mars. Yeah.
Belts in their
So,
rotation
morning
given
Earth no, in 93 million miles. Astronomical unit. Morning Mars.
100.
Morning gilayon. So, kung mag-launch sila orbit, isend nila dang para makatch dili.
Oh.
So, nga na ang goal sa physics. Istadihan nila unsay time nga maabot diri, mo pud time nga i-equal nila para maka-travel ang shuttle.
Wow. Ano no?
Pwede na ako i-calculate.
Grabe hay din mo ti. Naka-explain kada nating ako daning gatanaw-tanaw lang
For
ti.
example, rocks sa Mars.
Wow.
Red man ang red siya. Red planet.
Red planet. Tomorrow begins today. Wow.
Yeah, really someday maganda na Mars. Hindi ka na mag-feeling sa space, no?
Wala no?
So, money challenge karon sa mga astronauts. Solar flare,
Solar.
radiation sa sun. Kaya magka-affect sa travel.
Ay.
So, mana karon ang mga scientists ug engineers. Ga-device sila nga ang spacecraft kinahanglan proof yun nga dili
So, no?
melt.
Oo.
Kainit man kaayo ng solar radiation. Defying
O si
radiation.
pasabot na natin nagkuan na ang sun, nagka-grabe ang kainit.
No, meaning kung travel man gud ka ani nga space na. So kung naka sa Earth, naapa yung gitawag nga magnetic field.
Nga mo protect.
Mo protect.
Oo.
Yan,
Punig.
napoy atmosphere.
Oo.
Pero mawala na kali kaana,
Bigawas.
space na walay atmosphere nga mo trap sa Earth. I mean sun's radiation.
Oh, mao
Mao
na
na inig travel, mawala na sa atmosphere sa Earth, arang init na.
Ah.
Mana makit ani mo murag ang inig entry bitaw padaw na sa Earth. Uban makita nila murag kadyo ang kuan.
Kanang
Shuttle nga mabalik.
kay tungod sa
Uban makuan gyud masunog.
wala no.
Katong ubang mga katong